Well, I'm going to start by surprising you with one of those believe it or nots. Believe it or not, there are sometimes conflicts even in the church. Can you believe that? It seems almost impossible, but there are. And some of the ones that we currently deal with, not Kenosha Family Church specifically, but the church in America. And I have friends and colleagues, some of these for whom these are very strong conflicts that they have to deal with. One is music style. There are still music battles going on where half of the people say we ought to be singing only the old hymns of the church that our great-grandfather used to sing, and if they're good enough for great-grandfather, they're good enough for me, and that kind of thing. And then there are those who say, no, we need to sing contemporary music, the stuff that's new and modern, and you know, that people who aren't involved in church would appreciate more if they were to come. It wouldn't seem antiquated, and that would help us to reach new people to the church better by having music that they can relate to. And so that battle goes on and on. We kind of do a mix here. We mostly do newer contemporary music, but we throw those hymns in from time to time, or sometimes do updated versions of those old hymns. So a little bit of a compromise there. There's the question of open or closed communion. Now, again, this has never come up locally, at least not here in Kenosha Family Church. But when we have communion, it's not just for our church members. We say that it's for anybody who is a believer in Christ. It's for them. And yet, you know, as an ordained elder, having been given authority by the church to officiate communion and to serve communion, I have been in services where I was asked, when they were about to partake of communion, not to participate because I wasn't a member of that church, which seemed kind of odd to me. So you can guess which side we fall on. But the churches, there are a lot of churches who say you can only have communion if you're a member of our church. And then there are those churches who say, no, it's for all of the Lord's people. But that conflict continues. There is the question about whether or not women can be pastors. Of course, if you're part of the Church of the Nazarene, if you've been part of Kenosha Family Church, you know that we believe that they can be. Not a problem here, but we actually had a person once, years ago, attending and found out that we believed that women can also be pastors, and she said, I'm going to find another church. I'm not comfortable with that. Because she had been taught that in her church, in her previous church. And so that battle continues on. There is the question of the use of alcohol. You know, the Bible doesn't say thou shalt not ever drink alcohol. And yet our church says actually that's a good idea. You should never drink alcohol. They say that it has become such an evil thing in society, the damage it's done to our world, the threat of alcoholism and the pain and suffering that that's caused. It would just be better if we just stayed away from it. And unlike the ancient past, there are plenty of alternatives. It's no longer necessary to drink wine for the stomach. There are other things you can take for your stomach. And it's no longer necessary to drink alcohol because you can't have purified water. We can purify the water these days, and so on and so forth. But that battle continues. There are churches who say, you know, we believe that you should abstain and not partake at all. And there are other churches who have festivals and serve it. You know, and when we serve communion, by the way, even our communion juice is not alcoholic. We serve grape juice, fruit of the vine, not alcohol. But those are ideas of battles that are going on in the church to a lesser degree and some more. But conflicts are not something new. These have been going on since the church first began. You go to the book of Acts, and you get into those early chapters, the first half of chapter 15. There are conflicts taking place as the church is getting off the ground. And so in Israel, one of the big questions was, how should Christianity relate to Judaism? So Christianity was born out of Judaism. Jesus was a Jew. He grew up a Jew. And then, you know, he launched Christianity, where from now on people are following Christ instead of the Jewish law. And most of the earliest Christians, those early disciples, Peter, people like that, Paul, they were raised Jews. And when they became Christians, the questions came up, how do we relate to our past in our present? Are we new Christians still bound by Jewish law? Do those things still apply to us? And some of them said, well, just because you're a Christian, you need to also be a good Jew. Christianity is kind of a Jewish sect. And there are others who said, no, Christianity is completely different. We have been born out. We no longer observe the Passover. Jesus turned the Passover into our communion ritual. He said it has new meaning now when you take the unleavened bread and the juice. And so we moved beyond that. And then outside of Israel, places like Rome, Ephesus, Corinth, and others, they asked the question, how should Christianity relate to paganism? Because instead of growing up in a town where everybody's a Jew, they grew up in a town where everybody was a pagan. They believed in the Roman gods, Zeus, and they had the ancient idols and all of those things. And they asked the question, how does Christianity relate to the paganism all around us? Some of you might even think it's comical, but one of the places we see this today, still, is in Halloween. There are churches all over the country who teach their people, you should not observe Halloween. That's a pagan holiday that is involved in witchcraft and Satanism and all of these things, and Christians should have no part in that. And there are other churches who say, there are some pagan origins connected to Halloween, and some people choose to incorporate that. But overall, it's a holiday for giving candy to kids and letting them have fun and dress up in costumes, and there's nothing really wrong with that. So enjoy Halloween, but enjoy it without getting involved in the paganism aspects of it. And so that goes on. There are some others that you don't hear anything about, but they're actually true. The idea, our involvement with paganism. Are you aware that most of our days of the week are named after ancient gods? And they are named that way to honor those gods. Monday actually comes from Moon Day because they worship the moon. In fact, Abraham probably came from a moon worshiping community. And so we name a day of the week after the moon as a tribute or as an honor. Tuesday, there was a god named Tu, T-I-W, was a Norse god. And Tuesday's named for him. And, Saturday is named for Saturn. Thursday's named for Thor. And those were Norse gods. And we name our days of the week after those gods. And so, should we Christians be raising a stink and lobbying Congress? We need to rename the days of the week because we don't want to participate in paganism? Well, there are those who might think that. The months are the same way. The latter months are named by number. September, October, November, December are based on like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And so those are different, but January, March, June, those are all named after gods. And even, July is named after Julius Caesar, who the Romans believed became a god. And August, Caesar Augustus was jealous and said, well, if Julius gets a day a month, I get one. And so they renamed the 8th month August after Caesar Augustus. And so when we use those months' names, we're honoring those gods, are we not? Or not, because that's part of history that has evolved and changed, and they no longer have that meaning for us. So that's the early church. Well, in the letter to the Corinthians, remember now, Corinth is a very Roman pagan town or city. Paul spends part of his letter to the Corinthians answering questions that they had asked. We know from some of the things that are said in the Bible that the Corinthians had written Paul a letter that included some questions, and Paul spends time answering those questions. And so I want us to look at 1 Corinthians 8, chapter 8, verse 1. Just the first sentence. The first half of the first sentence. He's in one of our worship Bibles, page 928. If you're using my large print Bible that takes more pages, page 1639. 1 Corinthians 8:1. Now about food sacrificed to idols. And there's a colon there. He's not going to talk about that topic. They had asked him, what about food sacrificed to idols? What about that kind of meat? And so I want to point out that food sacrificed to idols is not a current issue. I've never had a member come to me and say, Pastor, what about food sacrificed to idols? Should I eat that? That's never come up. Well, it was a big deal in Rome and Corinth and Ephesus and in those pagan cities where Christianity was getting off the ground and flourishing. It was a big deal. It was a major topic. And the reason was because of the pagan animal sacrifice rituals. You know, the Jews had animal sacrifices, but that never became a problem for Christians. Can we eat that meat? Well, the answer is, well, why not? You know. But the pagan rituals were different. They would take a sheep and say, we're going to sacrifice this to Zeus, and we're giving it in honor of him. But the custom was that in any animal sacrifice, it was divided into 3 parts. And part of that meat was literally burned, symbolic of giving this animal to Zeus. But part of it was given to the priests. It was one of the ways that they subsidized the priests who didn't have time to go out and farm for themselves. And so they depended on the people would give a sheep, they would burn part of it, and they would keep part of it. But there was still some left, a lot left. Guess what they did with that? Sent to the local meat markets. In fact, it was so common that the majority of meat market supplies came from animal pagan sacrifice. They were meat sacrificed to the fake gods, to gods like Zeus and all of those. So that raised questions. Those early Christians, they became Christians having grown up in that culture. And so then they said, wait a minute. Should a Christian buy meat from such a market? If that meat has been dedicated to Zeus and slaughtered for Zeus and killed in his honor, should I be eating that meat? What if I go to the neighbor's house and they're having a barbecue? Can I go over there knowing that they probably got their meat from the meat market where it was probably sacrificed to idols? Is that okay for a Christian to do? Was eating such a meat engaging in idol worship in some way? Since it's idol-given meat, if I eat it, am I unwillingly or, almost unknowingly, except that I know in the back of my mind, am I participating in idol worship? Am I taking part? Or perhaps would caring about this issue be giving importance to something that's false? Since I know that Zeus isn't even real, when you sacrifice to Zeus, you're sacrificing to nothing. So Zeus is not involved in the meat. There is no Zeus. So if I make a big deal out of it, am I not kind of acting as if there is a Zeus? And as if Zeus is important? So maybe as a good Christian, I should definitely be eating this stuff just to prove that I don't care about Zeus. And so it was a tough situation for those early Christians. And they struggled with these issues enough that the Corinthians, apparently they had been kind of bickering about it in the church. Some of the Christians were saying, oh, we ought to eat all of it we want, not worry about it. And others were saying, oh, we can't participate with the idols. And so they wrote Paul and asked him. And so he decided it was worth an answer. And so I'm going to read his entire answer, or at least this section of the entire answer. He deals with it later as well. And then we're going to kind of go back through it piece by piece. So 1 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning with verse 1, and we're going to read through verse 13, the entire chapter. In fact, if you're using an NIV, it's subtitled, Concerning Food Sacrificed to Idols. Now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. And that's some complicated language. We're gonna go through that later. Verse 4, so then, about eating food sacrificed to idols. We know that, quote, an idol is nothing at all in the world, end quote, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods, that's lowercase gods, and many lords with a small l, yet for us there is but one God, capital G, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live, and there is but one Lord, capital L, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that your exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. Well, I want to hone in on four main elements to his answer. There's a lot here, and we're just going to scratch the surface of some of these things. But back to those element one, knowledge versus love. Those first three verses that I did say we would come back to. I'm going to read it again, 8:1-3. Now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. But knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. Again, the grammar, Paul was, the equivalent, they believe, of a modern PhD in Hebrew and biblical Old Testament knowledge, and his writing was complicated. He would write entire paragraphs as one sentence, And when we turn them into English, we turn them into a 5-sentence paragraph. But he would have all these clauses and all this stuff, and it would be confusing. But they believe the gist of what he's really saying here is he's talking about the difference between knowing about someone and knowing someone. You know the difference? I remember when I was a kid, my favorite baseball player was Johnny Bench. And I studied about Johnny Bench. I bought a book that was written about Johnny Bench, and I followed his statistics all the time. And I could tell you back then, my memory's not what it once was, I could tell you his batting average and how many home runs he has so far this season, and I could tell you all that stuff about Johnny Bench. And I knew all kinds of things about him. But you know what? I didn't know Johnny Bench. Never met him. Never shook his hand. Never had a meal with him. Never talked to him. I don't know what his favorite color was. I knew his baseball world. And you can see that's a big difference. A big difference. Well, unfortunately today, there are people who are the same about God. They've been going to church. They've been in Sunday school classes. They've read their Bible, and they can tell you all kinds of things about God from having read about it. But they don't really know God. They've never had that relationship with God where they've gotten to really know Him and love Him, and He them. Well, He always loves them, but they don't really feel that love or understand that love because they don't know. And Paul is really saying, first of all, just because you think you know this stuff, that's not the important thing. So you might have your opinion, and you might believe that, we should absolutely stay away from eating meat sacrificed to idols, or your opinion might be, we absolutely ought to eat meat sacrificed to idols to prove that they don't mean anything. That knowledge, it might be puffing you up. But if you don't have the love mixed in, it's not building you up. And you want to be built up, not puffed up. So first of all, don't think too highly of the knowledge you think you have. You might be wrong. Remember that I asked a few weeks ago. I told you about my professor who asked us the question, when was the last time God changed your mind about something? If it's been a while, then you're probably not listening. Because you're not omniscient like God is. You don't know everything. He does, you don't. So that what you think you know, maybe you don't. Even though there are some things we believe pretty strongly. So the second element I want to talk about is the issue of real or not. And we see it most clearly in 1 Corinthians 8, 4-6. Let's read 4-6 again. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols. We know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods with small g and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, capital G, the Father, for whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, capital L, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. So in 1 Corinthians 8, 4-6, Paul concedes and admits the idols are nothing. Those of you who are taking the side that idols don't really mean anything, you're right, they don't. There is no Zeus. The fact that this was sacrificed to Zeus doesn't mean if you eat it that Zeus is getting to take control of your life. There is no Zeus. You don't have to worry about Zeus. And if you don't, Zeus isn't going to get mad at you because there's no one to get mad at you. You don't need to worry about what Zeus is going to do to you. There is no Zeus. And so Paul says, that is true. You guys are right about that as far as it goes. So that's the second main element in his answer. And by the way, there are all kinds of things like astrology that I talked about a few weeks ago, or people who think somehow what the stars are doing controls your life. They don't. The concept of luck and various superstitions, oh, if you do that, it'll bring you bad luck. What that really means, see, we've kind of dispersonified luck. But in the ancient thinking, there was a force that was real, that was called luck. And it caused good things and bad things to happen to people based on things that they did or didn't do. And if you believe that that power exists, you're denying God the Creator and His power. Just like Zeus, there's no luck. You can roll dice all night long and keep winning that dice game. That doesn't mean you're lucky. It means that coincidentally you rolled the same, it's all chance. But anyways, those things aren't real. Element 3 is the idea of the weak and who is strong. 2 Corinthians 7 and 8, or 8, 7 and 8. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. Since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. So, the idea of the weak and the strong is backwards from the way I first understood it. I remember as a kid, when there was someone at church who was stricter than the rest, when there was one of the ladies who believed that she should always never cut her hair and wear it in a bun, and she should always wear a long dress and never wear slacks or pants. We believed that she was the stronger Christian because she was stricter. But really, Corinthians 8 teaches us that it's the other way around. Those who are the strictest about things that aren't necessarily really true. I remember being in a ladies' Bible study. Well, it wasn't designed to be a ladies' Bible study. But I was the leader, but it turned into one. The only people who attended were the ladies. And it was for our elderly ladies. In fact, Rosalie's mother, Irma Rutaka, Irma's sister-in-law, Norma, they were some of the three main ones. And one day it came up in the topic about, that was my fault. It came up in the topic about wearing pants. And one of the ladies looked at Irma and said, Irma, if your husband knew you were wearing slacks, he'd roll over in his grave. And she started, no, I guess it was Norma that they said that to. And she started laughing and slapping her knee and said, I'll bet he would. But there she was in slacks, having spent most of her life believing that was wrong to do. So it's kind of backwards from the way I had first understood it. I thought, she was the stronger Christian because she wouldn't wear pants. She was the stronger Christian because she wore her head in a bun. When I was going through college training, we were just coming out of an era in the Church of the Nazarene where as ministers were being ordained, the general superintendent ordaining them would meet with them right before the service and look at their hands and tell them, if you're wearing a wedding ring, you take it off now and never put it on again. Because men should not be wearing jewelry. Well, they stopped doing that about the time I was going through college, and rightly so. But at that age, I thought the strong Christians are strong enough to not wear jewelry even if it's their wedding ring, and the weak Christians go ahead and put it on anyway, like the rest of the pagan world. But we've since learned that's not the way it works. So Paul says that the weak are those who still have this strictness that's coming from someplace other than what the Bible actually teaches. It's coming from our own logic and our own traditions and our own customs and our own fears. Element 4, freedom versus love. And I want to share this by reading 9 to 13 again, and then by sharing a couple of quotes. Paul says, "Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way, you wound their conscience. You sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them all to fall." So, here's the first quote. We have freedom in principle to eat when there is no inherently anti-Christian implication involved. That is, just because it's been sacrificed to Zeus, who cares? There's no Zeus. So we have the freedom to eat. Then he goes on to say, but voluntary abstention, that is staying away from eating meat, when other Christians might be damaged by one's freedom. So for the sake of this other person, let's jump to alcohol. I can say, well, you know, I can have a beer when I watch a game. I can have a glass of wine with dinner. Doesn't bother me none. And I can let people know that. I can let my friends know that. And I can do it with them. I can invite them over. But then, what if one of my friends, one of my church members are alcoholics? And I'm teaching them, well, it's okay to have one. And so they have one. But they're alcoholics. My okay with it makes it, causes them problems. And so that's part, not all, but that's part of the reason why the Church of the Nazarene has said. In fact, you have to remember that when we were founded, part of the earliest Church of the Nazarenes were ministering like in the Bowery. They were ministering in places where they were taking drunks off the street, helping them go dry, and teaching them to live a better life. They used to talk about, we no longer turn wine or water into wine, but we turn wine into milk. We take guys who were spending all of their money on booze, and they're now spending it on buying milk for their kids. Because that's the ministry that we're doing. How can we then tell them, by the way, it's okay to drink, everybody, except you three who have trouble with it? Isn't it better if we all just say, to help you, we're not going to drink either? And so that's where that came from. But it comes from this principle, if it's going to hurt your brother, abstain. So here's another quote, which includes a quote from one of my favorite Christian authors, N.T. Wright. The second half of the quote is N.T. Wright. Society bombards us with a myriad of signals urging us on to demand rather than relinquish our rights. How often we hear that, especially as Americans? Nothing more important than freedom. Stand up for your rights. Yet, quote, insisting on one's rights, even in insisting on one's rights as a Christian, is a sign that something else other than true God is being worshipped. Think about that. Insisting on one's rights, even insisting on one's rights as a Christian, is a sign that something else other than the true God is being worshipped. You ever consider that you might worship freedom more than you worship God? Freedom above all. Well, I'm not going to give up my freedom for God. Then you're putting freedom above God. I'm not going to give up drinking just to help my neighbor. What's more important? Loving your neighbor or your freedom to drink? I want to end with 4 application questions based on the 4 elements we looked at briefly. Do we know more about God or do we know God? Think about your own situation. Do we know about God or do you really know God? Because you might be able to answer all kinds of questions on a test, but do you really know Him? Make sure that you don't get so tied up in studying the Scripture, and not that we shouldn't, but don't let that ever become a substitute for knowing God. You have to really know Him, have a relationship with Him. Do we give reality to false gods? Are we doing things like playing around with astrology, being superstitious about things we ought not be superstitious about? And I've known intelligent, elderly, what I consider to be wise people make statements that are about superstitions. And, they'll break a mirror and the next thing, oh no, that's bad luck. What do you mean that's bad luck? It's too bad you broke your mirror, but that's as far as it goes, unless you cut your finger on it. It's not going to cause you to lose money tomorrow. It's not going to break up your girlfriend a week from today. The mirror doesn't have that kind of power over you. But just talking like it does, it makes things seem like things are operating in the world other than God being sovereign. Do we value weak or strong values? Do we think about those who are the most strict and give them the most honor, kind of assuming that they're the strong ones, when in reality, they're the weak ones. They are still hanging on to things that they could be free of. We ought to be kind to them in their weakness. We don't want to hurt them. But what do we really consider to be the strong and the weak? Let's make sure we don't get that flipped upside down. And lastly, would you give up some of your rights for love? If you could think of a situation where you need to give up a right because you love somebody, would you? Or are you going to be stubborn and say, I've got my rights, and I'm going to hang on to them and exercise them. I don't care who it hurts. Let's pray.